Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is episode 5 of our series, The Dollar's Last Stand, where we're digging into the really profound challenges facing U.S. fiscal stability.
And today's topic is a big one.
It really is. We're tackling the most radical and maybe the most seductive domestic challenge to how we think about money, modern monetary theory, or MMT.
And our mission for you, the listener, is to get past the talking points. We want to really dissect the architecture of this idea, what it claims, why it's so tempting, for politicians.
Of course.
And why, at the end of the day, almost every mainstream economist thinks it's a dangerous, maybe even an irreversible bet.
And what's so fascinating is that the philosophical groundwork for all this, it wasn't laid by some fringe academics. It came from the very top.
Right.
We have to go back to 2002. Vice President Dick Cheney reportedly turns to his Treasury Secretary, Paul O'Neill, and says, Reagan proved deficits don't matter.
That quote is absolutely critical. I mean, Cheney wasn't an MMT theorist, not at all. But he was articulating the quiet logic both parties had already adopted.
Which is?
That the whole household budget analogy for the government, it was basically dead. Yeah. MMT just takes that idea and builds a whole revolutionary framework around it.
So the central question for us now is whether our political economy, Congress, public opinion, can actually handle a system where the only brake on spending is inflation.
Exactly, because it assumes politicians can act like nimble economic technocrats.
Which history suggests is a big assumption. And if that theory fails, we're going to show you how the math doesn't lie.
Yeah.
That compounding interest, it always catches up.
Always.
Okay, let's start there. Segment 1. The architecture of what some people call free money. The foundational claim is, it's actually pretty simple.
It is. It all boils down to one core distinction. Governments that issue their own currency, like the U.S., are currency issuers, not currency users.
Good. What's the difference?
Well, you and I were currency users. We have to earn money or borrow it before we can spend a dime. The government, MMT argues, doesn't. It doesn't need to tax you or borrow from China to get the dollars it needs to spend.
So walk us through the mechanics of that. How does it get the money?
It's what they call the sovereignty of the keystroke. When Congress decides to spend money, say, on a new aircraft carrier, the Treasury tells the Fed, and the Fed just credits a bank account digitally.
It's keystroke money.
It's keystroke money. Alan Greenspan, the former Fed chair, even said it himself. He said there is zero probability of default for the U.S. because we can always, technically, create the money to pay any bill that's in U.S. dollars.
So MMT basically takes that technical fact and turns it into a policy prescription. And if you can just create money, that changes the whole purpose of taxes, doesn't it?
It completely upends it. In the MMT framework, taxes are absolutely not for funding the government. They have 3 other very different jobs.
That's counterintuitive.
Yeah.
So what's the first one?
The first job is creating demand for the currency itself. By making you pay your taxes in U.S. dollars, the government forces everyone to need and use dollars. It anchors the whole system.
Okay, so taxes validate the currency. What about the spending constraint?
That's the second and most important purpose. Taxes act as a hydraulic brake on inflation.
A brake.
Stephanie Kelton, who is a leading MMT economist, says it plainly. Taxes are for subtraction. If the economy overheats and inflation spikes, the theory says Congress must immediately raise taxes or cut spending.
To suck that extra purchasing power back out of the economy.
Exactly. And the third purpose is the obvious one, redistribution or, discouraging things like smoking.
So if the government can spend almost without limit, what is the boundary? I mean, there have to be one, right?
There is, and they're very clear on this. They call it the real resource constraint. The moment government spending outstrips the economy's physical ability to produce, the actual amount of steel, the number of available workers, doctors, concrete, that's when you get inflation. Because you have too many dollars chasing too few goods.
And for MMT, that's it. Inflation is the only constraint that matters. Yeah. If inflation is low, the deficit could be $1 trillion, $2 trillion. It doesn't matter.
And you can see the appeal. It just vaporizes the biggest political obstacle to any big spending program. The question, how will you pay for it, just disappears.
A Green New Deal, massive infrastructure, it all seems plausible.
It offers a path to big social goals without the political pain.
But, and this is a huge but, this is where the theory runs headlong into reality, because the consensus against MMT among actual mainstream economists is, well, it's pretty staggering.
It's extraordinary. You can look at the University of Chicago's IGM Forum survey. They asked top economists from across the spectrum, and literally 0 of them endorsed MMT's core claims. not one.
So this isn't a left versus right thing.
Yeah. Not at all. It's a unified front. The critiques are scathing. You have Paul Krugman, the liberal Nobel laureate, saying, debating MMT is like playing Calvin Ball, a game where the rules are just made up as you go along.
And on the other side,
You have Larry Summers, a former Treasury Secretary, who called it fallacious and voodoo economics. Even the current Fed chair, Jerome Powell, said the idea that deficits don't matter for a country like ours is just wrong.
okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If the mechanics are technically correct, if the government can create money with a keystroke, why is everyone so sure that policymakers can't manage the inflation risk?
Because that is the absolute heart of the problem. The critics say that risk isn't just understated, it's the fatal flaw. We can boil all the arguments down to 3 points where, the math just runs into political reality.
Okay, what's the first then?
It's the unreliable inflation signal. The theory needs Congress to be incredibly nimble. But inflation, as an economic signal, is a lagging indicator. By the time it shows up in the official numbers, the damage is done. The misallocations are already baked in. The economist Charles Goodhart put it perfectly. He said it becomes much more difficult to counter once it's already taken hold.
It's like waiting for your engine to seize before you decide to check the oil.
Exactly. Which leads straight to the second and maybe the most critical flaw, political paralysis. MMT demands that Congress acts like a cool, rational technocrat.
Meaning they have to be willing to raise taxes or slash popular programs the second inflation ticks up.
Instantly.
Which is completely detached from how politics actually works.
100%. Politicians love the spending accelerator. They loathe the tax and spending cut break. Our whole political system is designed for gridlock, not for swift, painful austerity. The system is just biased toward permanent inflation.
And the third flaw is that MMT seems to underestimate the market itself. The bond vigilantes are back.
They are. The market imposes discipline even if Congress won't. I mean, look at what happened in 2024. The yield on the 30-year U.S. Treasury bond went toward 5%.
And that's not just a number.
No, that is the global market screaming that it's pricing in long-term risk. It's demanding a higher premium to lend to the U.S. for 30 years. They're voting with their money and they're saying, we don't trust your long-term fiscal path.
So you can print the money, but you can't print confidence.
And confidence is the only currency that really matters.
Okay, so when MMT advocates get hit with all of this, they have one answer they always go back to. Japan. They say, look, they've had debt over 200% of their economy for decades, massive deficits, and no hyperinflation. They've defied fiscal gravity.
And the Japan case looks compelling on the surface. But applying Japan's experience to the U.S. is a huge, huge mistake. The structural differences are just profound.
So what are the key differences we have to get our heads around?
Number one, without a doubt, is debt ownership. Japan's debt is financed almost entirely from within. Something like 85 to 90% of Japanese government bonds are held by Japanese people, Japanese banks, and the Bank of Japan.
So it's a closed loop.
It's a closed ecosystem. It's the Japanese government owing money to the Japanese people. The U.S., on the other hand, relies on foreigners, China, Europe, oil exporters, to buy roughly 30% of our debt. If they get nervous, we face immediate capital flight.
Japan has a financial bunker that we just don't have.
We don't. Difference number two. Japan is the world's largest creditor nation. The U.S. is the world's largest debtor nation.
What does that mean in practical terms?
It means Japan, on net, lends money to the rest of the world. The rest of the world lends money to us. It's a fundamental difference in your underlying stability.
And the third thing is, the Japan experiment itself seems to be ending, isn't it?
It is, dramatically. For decades, Japan's aging, shrinking population was this powerful deflationary force. It masked the debt. But that's fading.
Right.
Japan's inflation has been above 2% for, I think, 43 months straight now. And in March of 2024, the Bank of Japan did something huge. They ended negative interest rates. That's a clear signal they are retreating from these experimental policies.
And Japan's success came with decades of flat wages and a crashing currency. That's not really a victory.
It's a terrible definition of victory.
Which brings us to our own experiment. Starting in 2020, the COVID response was basically an undeclared test of MMT principles.
It was MMT on a scale we've never seen. The government pushed, between $4.6 and $5 trillion into the economy. And crucially, there were no pay-fors. The political class just decided deficits didn't matter in a crisis.
And MMT says that's fine as long as you don't breach that real resource constraint. Well, we got our answer on that pretty quick.
We certainly did. The outcome was a massive inflation reckoning. It peaked at 9.1% in June 2022, the highest since 1981. And while some defenders of the spending blame supply chains or greedflation,
The more traditional view seems to have won out.
right, that all that new money provided the fuel for demand to just wildly outstrip supply across the board.
But the real check on this, the long-term price tag, isn't just that inflation spike. It's the cost of servicing all that new debt. This is where the math really becomes unavoidable.
This is the single most ominous number in the federal budget. Net interest payments on the debt hit $881 billion in fiscal year 2024. Projections show they will absolutely blow past $1 trillion in 2025.
$1 trillion. I mean, that number is so big it's almost meaningless. Put that in perspective for us. What does $1 trillion in interest get us?
It gets us nothing. It's a sunk cost. It's rent on money we already spent. To grasp the scale, think about this. Interest payments are now larger than the entire budget of the Department of Defense.
Wow.
We are spending more to service old debt than on the entire military that secures our position in the world. It's a staggering figure.
And that's what creates this fiscal doom loop people talk about.
It's precisely the doom loop. We are now in a situation where the government has to borrow more money just to pay the interest on the money it already borrowed. It's a spiral. The CBO project's public debt will hit 118% of GDP by 2035. The policy failed to shrink deficits even in good economic times.
So let's connect this to the history books. MMT proponents tend to dismiss the classic examples of currency collapse. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. They say the U.S. is different. Why is that a dangerous argument?
Because the lesson from every single one of those currency graveyards is not that they ran out of money, it's that they made a catastrophic political choice. The difference between the U.S. and those failed states is one of degree, not of kind.
And that choice always seems to be the same. Printing money to paper over a collapse in production.
That's the trigger. In Weimar Germany, they printed marks to pay striking workers, keeping their paychecks the same even though nothing was being produced. In Zimbabwe and Venezuela, they printed money to fund social programs after their main industries, agriculture and oil, collapsed.
So when a real supply shock hits, MMT requires politicians to be disciplined and cut back.
But history shows they do the exact opposite. They print more to try and shield the population from the pain. They pour gasoline on the fire.
And that's when you get the nonlinear collapse. The deficits don't matter until they do.
They're the only thing that matters. Confidence holds for a very long time, and then it just shatters. And when that happens, being a sovereign currency issuer provides zero protection from economic ruin. The political courage that MMT relies on, it just isn't there.
Which brings us to our final thought. The only reason the U.S. has managed to run this kind of undeclared MMT experiment without an immediate catastrophe is because we have an insurance policy. It's called the exorbitant privilege.
That's it. The dollar's status as the world's reserve currency is the only thing that lets us run these deficits and still have the world buy our debt. Everyone needs dollars for trade, for banking, so they're forced, in a way, to absorb our borrowing.
But that privilege is clearly eroding. The dollar share of global reserves is down to around 57% now, from a high of 66% in 2015.
Which brings us to the core trap, known as the Triffin dilemma. To supply the world with the dollars it needs for trade, the U.S. has to run big deficits. But running those deficits year after year eventually undermines global confidence in the dollar itself.
So we have an impossible choice. We can either cut our deficits, which would starve the world of liquidity and cause a global slowdown.
Or we can keep spending and borrowing, which accelerates the erosion of the dollar's status.
So the greatest threat to the dollar really does come from within, from our own debt and from theories like MMT that justify it.
Absolutely. If MMT and the political choices it enables speed up the decline of that exorbitant privilege, then all the mathematical consequences we've been talking about, the trillion-dollar interest payments and worse, they will fall directly and brutally on the American people.
A serious thought to consider as we move forward. What happens when the world stops giving us a discount on our debt?